Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first webinar of 2026. Welcome all of you who have been with us every month. We kind of have a special two-parter this month. This was actually one of the most requested asks last year, is really digging into not only the new technologies that we've seen come on, like AI and agentic technologies, but how is it that we really apply them? How do we insert them? How do we get everybody on board to get a groundswell that really, really moves the needle and can even shake up the stock price? And we're happy to share that our partners and one of the clients that will be sharing with us has managed to do that. The stock price changed as a result of his ability to discern pricing when it came in inventory management. And so being able to determine pricing based on what he was able to expose through AI is this fantastic theme and these tangible benefits that we get out of these technologies that I don't think get talked about enough. So in today's two-part, we're going to start like we always do. I know most of you like the decks. There's so many people that register to come and then just say, hey, is the deck coming, if we're a couple days late. So I really love that the community has grown to expect these and find them valuable. So we'll go through our normal format of going through kind of what's new out there in the supply chain and talk to you a little bit about achieving peak performance in it. And then my colleague Bhavesh is joining today. He's had several new strategic accounts that signed on in 2025. So it's fresh off the story, fresh off the page of achieving value with clients, understanding how to approach it. How does the contracting work? What do you have to ask for? What kind of policies come into question when you're looking at some sort of technology that might touch every single element of your operation? So we'll get into it today. And then on February 3rd, next week, you'll get a follow-up invite and we'll have a couple of clients on to share their stories and to help validate some of the stuff that we talked to today in theory, how they put it into practice. Okay, so without further ado, I'll get started with first portion. As always, feel free to ask questions throughout the course of the webinar. You do have the Q&A option as well as just asking via chat, and we'll either answer you here or answer the question out loud for the group itself. All right, so let's get started. Achieving peak performance. So one of the acquisitions that one of our strategic partners made was called Peak AI. And we wanted to highlight a little bit about what it was that was trying to be achieved there. So many of us have started with, different ways to optimize the supply chain. There's definitely rules-based wins that we could have in supply chain early on. And so were definitely the low-hanging fruit that we began with. But as complexity began to emerge and technology was able to combat that complexity, we get into what we call the supply chain reality check. Okay, there was an explosion of tons of different data sources. All of a sudden, everybody had the best inventory tool. Everybody had the best way to track and manage distribution, checkpoints, SLAs. The decisions were still delayed. They were still manual. And of course, as we've all experienced, if you've even been in technology for half a second, siloed. Every department has a different way of approaching what it is they need to do to optimize. I'd say probably about 15 years ago, that was still the case. We're now seeing decision makers and leaders come together to begin making those decisions, knowing that there's going to be impact down the road if there isn't something that's done to look at what it is we're trying to optimize, right? And so what do we get? A proliferation of pilots, AI pilots everywhere. I bet everybody, here, everybody that's registered, everybody that comes to our website, I can't tell you how many people are asking about pilots, over the last several years, and we've definitely done them. They're not so much about proof of whether the technology works. It's proof of whether the outcome's going to work. The unfortunate part about these pilots everywhere is it's not a real view of how the organization is actually going to adopt and how it is that they will adhere to the new policies put in place as a result of these added AI or agents in the organization. So while they're everywhere, the impact is limited because it's not at scale. So we continue to get more data, more tools, and it starts to cause more problems. So what do we do? How do we look at this? What are we kind of talking about today? Agentic AI is in production, so it does exist. I know it sounds theoretical, and when we were talking about RPA, Yes, true. There was times where it didn't work quite as we said. Honestly, really, when AI first came on the scene, there were several places where we really had to get smarter about it because humans were catching up to the knowledge of AI at the same time. But agentic, it's in production. It's the concept that personified what we called RPA automation robots into agentic thinkers, having agency, being able to discern, decide, proactively make decisions, and like Haynes Celestial, begin to expose data points that we didn't put meaning into with just the human eye. The ability to absorb the amount of data that it takes to be able to look at an organization holistically for what it should do in the future and how it, its past may have affected that. Those are all elements that agents have been programmed, have been taught, have been gearing up to produce. Leaders like Amazon and Walmart, they've been deploying AI agents on one of their biggest problems, shrink. The returns, and Bhavesh will get into some of that too as we just got past the holidays. I'm sure several people are still making I've got 30 days left to return, my Christmas present or my Hanukkah present or my end of the year present. And what is going to happen to that inventory? How is it going to get tracked? How are we going to make sure that that gets put into where it's supposed to go? So as volume increases, the importance of being able to proactively attack the data and understand what's going on is crucial. Organizations continue to try and shift the way that they look at this, right? It traditionally, and Bhavesh has told me some stories of his past life, there's a lot of reactive decisions because once something would go into production and happen, all of a sudden it was like, well, what do we do now? How do we solve for this? These are alerts, let's do a post-mortem. How do we not do that again next month, right? And so there's very reactive approaches. Again, because there were so many rule-based elements, it was easy for us to take a peek at some of those and say, okay, well, if we slightly change this, it's significantly better, right? Or if we make a tweak here, that's going to represent millions of dollars. Moving into predictive, began to say, okay, there's some patterns. There's some seasonal patterns. There's some, time of year in certain regions due to, inclement weather maybe, or hurricane season that we have to take into consideration and become more predictive about what's going on. Having the forecasting and recommendations. The back office used to be a cost center. Now more and more, the ability to prescribe what should happen next, that comes from the data in the back office. And leaders that are savvy are leveraging this data and leveraging this knowledge to better their organizations and advance their careers. And we've now moved to autonomous, continuous monitoring, making sure that the decisions are being made in a timely manner, that they're still adhering to policies that are in place, and executing across multiple systems. No longer was it just a one-for-one, and now these agents really give us the ability to get a lot of work done efficiently and accurately. Another big win with the agents. So where do they fit in supply chain? We'll talk about a few places today. There's several different areas, and we've seen, industry-wise, those of you who have requested this over and over again, retail and manufacturing. No, there's absolutely no mystery there. The other kind of areas that we've seen adoption really is in transportation and logistics, lots of checkpoints, areas where, the agent could potentially discern what's going on, why there's a delay, what the potential impact could be. And then if you cross over, across that visual there, the planning and forecasting then is a natural byproduct of having more data. So the ability to expose data, interact with data, gives you the ability to then action data. And that's really what's going to move the needle in an organization and really what everybody's trying to achieve in adding technology. It's not technology for the sake of technology. It's technology for the sake of betterment and producing outcomes. It continuously adapts to new technology. So the beauty of it is that all of these different elements and some of the things that Bhavesh will be talking about, it really hasn't been as difficult from a technological perspective to infuse, right? I think manufacturing is a heavy technology giant in general, historically speaking. Industrial revolution on manufacturing has always had to be ahead a little bit. But when it comes to the volumes that we have in today's world and how many transactions are happening and how many omni-channels of transactions are taking place, it got a little complex. The digital integration that's been taking place over the last several years has been really interesting because while supply chain by its nature the definition implies chain connectivity, right? Understanding how a process connects. And it's really been the most interesting place to see how all these different inflection points of the supply chain process, both in inventory, pricing, and ultimate output, really do get disrupted and don't have as much of a chain connecting them. So we introduce agents to begin orchestrating that. So some quick best practices, and then I am going to invite Bhavesh here to get spotlighted here, so he can join me for the questions that were submitted and the discussion portion of this. But one of the things that we always like to share, especially since we have a wide group of folks that have either started, thinking about starting, maybe dabbled before and gave up. And I know that, you know, the pilot question continues to come up when we have events and talk tracks like this. We suggest starting with a POC, you know, actual data, not just a test, you know, try it out. We have, you know, Wonderbots, I'm sure several other service providers have different offerings that are more about the validation of how this works with your organization. And then we roll that cost into, you know, your ultimate output, because the POC very quickly, if you're committed, will prove that it's something that your organization is going to want to adopt. You know, some of the other things that we need to make sure of is having those guardrails in place, making sure that you've talked to the other constituents, the other people that are going to be affected by this new autonomous process. Ensuring data quality. You know, one of the big use cases is getting data clean. But what we can do is where we begin to ingest that data, see where it is that we can optimize it, see where there's things that can be purged, consolidated, moved, and maybe eliminated. Elimination is a big name of the game here. And then monitoring and managing costs. You know, it's really important to make sure that when we're monitoring, it's the only way to keep humans in the loop, right? It's the only way for us to make sure that if there's any elements that need to be taken on by somebody, a decision being made that's outside the scope of what we've programmed, you know, we need to make sure that those decisions can be acted upon. All right, so Bhavesh, I'll ask you to get spotlight if you haven't already. And let's start with the tricky question, because this actually is one of the questions that somebody asked. Why do AI investments stall? And I think if we start that and reverse engineer into some of the topics that we talked about, I think that'll be a great place to start. And I think it starts with scale. So Bhavesh, thank you so much for always agreeing to join me on these conversations. I always learn so much from you. But tell us a little bit about why they stall. We've been talking about AI for 3 to 5 years. We've done hundreds of pilots, POCs, whatever flavor you want to call them. And why do they stall when everybody says this is what works, this is what we're supposed to be doing? Why doesn't it work?
Hi, thanks, Paula, for having me. And hey, good morning, everyone. So I think we've been, you know, helping our customers with this very scenario. And I would say in most cases, people sometimes get bogged down with like, hey, what model are we using, or what tech stack are we using, and all of that stuff, rather than focused on is that, hey, what's the impact that we are trying to do? And then the impact, of course, has to have time element too. So, you know, if you're just working through and it takes months to see the impact because you are just focused on tech rather than what you're going to actually deliver, that's partly why they stall. So, but fortunately, we haven't seen them stall, because most of what we've been able to help our customers with is, even if it is, you know, one specific real impact use case that we start to drive, we talk and deliver it in the matter of weeks rather than months. And I think that's, so the timing and that impact, I think, are the two things versus the, you know, heavy focus on tech or model or other things.
I completely agree. And so let's break those two down, the timing. Let's start there, because often, you know, we had to do it yesterday. So most of the clients or most folks starting have already started to do research or know that they're either behind the curve or, you know, the curve, or trying to figure out how it is that they're supposed to move forward. When we're talking about timing with a client and truly assessing what the outcome is going to be, what are some of the hindrances? What are some of the factors that come into place, especially with AI? You know, and especially when we're talking about agents autonomously working in our systems, yeah. What are some of the things that we come across that folks haven't quite thought through yet that might be helpful?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So we just worked through the same scenario with one of the Fortune 500 retailer actually, and so even though in some cases, teams or us and others are ready to go, there are certain, and I think it's for the right guardrails. So there are policy guardrails that you want to make sure that you are, before in the technology you do that infosec review and you're good to go. Now you have to see, okay, not just infosec review. How is your data being protected? How is your AI that you're going to use is going to be responsible or not? So those are the new, and what's going on is that these are some of the new things that the organizations are trying to actually also do a good job at it. So sometimes they are also figuring it out. So it's a collaborative, but those could sometimes end up taking more time, even though you and the team that you're working with are ready to go.
No, I completely agree. And I think that's one of the reasons why, just in our wealth of experience, from all the consultants that make up the Wonderbots family, we knew when agentic hit, it wasn't as much of the noise that we saw of Gen AI. Like, we didn't put much focus into that. Generative AI is like, okay, good, that's going to help coders code faster. Like, okay, got it. But when agentic came out, we said, hold on a second. Let's pause. Let's take a look at this. Let's evaluate. And we actually wrote a white paper while everybody was probably building, their first two agents. We stopped, paused, and took a peek at what it was that was going to make this a long-term strategy. And not only a strategy, but an executable strategy that you can measure every step of the way, right? And so the agentic process management, which we'll put in the notes after this webinar and send along for you guys to download the white paper, we paused, right? And so the tenets that we really thought about, Bhavesh, and I think this is what you're alluding to, is governance is one of those elements, right? Understanding what is the policy in-house. And so we've seen in-house lawyers, we've seen external lawyers. How are some of the organizations managing what their AI policy is, or potentially, HR handbooks are going to be looking to in the future? How are we seeing those connect with automation vendors? Because we didn't really get in the weeds on those conversations, before. But tell us a little bit about how that's unfolding.
No, so those those are actually very, very important in every scenario that we've actually helped the customers, because you're trying to figure out, like, okay, there is an autonomy aspect of it, right? And then there is, of course, first of all, whatever we've actually helped deliver, we don't just say it's agent, right? That's why we say agent takes. So in all the process flows, there are elements that are actually done deterministically, so the robots should do that. And then there are ones that are probabilistic, so the agent should do it. So where we are trying to drive those autonomies, you have to like govern it essentially, right? So when you try to govern it, you're trying to figure out how do you create that AI trust layer, or how do you have, even within agents, like what access should they have, what segregation of duties you are trying to do. So in some cases, like we've helped, if some agent is doing a purchasing, and then they are purchasing too much, then hey, make sure that there is an agent that is like a policy monitoring agent, that's actually making sure that you can only purchase from the vendor that had the best performance, and also make sure that you can only purchase in this order quantity, not too much. So these are like the things that you can do in just designing itself, but more than that, this guardrails and AI trust layer and the policy rule books that companies are writing are actually like serving as a foundation.
Yes, no, definitely. And we have a partnership with Michael Best too, an attorney, a law firm that's very well known, that is helping write policy for organizations too. So if you need a recommendation or referral there, they've been doing some great work in adopting agentic along the way too. Something you mentioned in there, Bhavesh, I think is so important, as you said, people say they're agents, right? So it's like there's the agents. But we know that there's some use cases or elements of a process that are deterministic, right? And that another tool could potentially do the job. So let's talk a little bit about that, right? Just because something exists does not mean that it is the right tool for the job, right? And I think that sounds obvious, but I think everybody's clamoring to get the shiny toy to get the last, 10 miles of throughput without thinking through, all of the other sides of it. So when you're advising a client, especially somebody who's pretty savvy, maybe done enough Googling to get themselves in trouble. How is it that you have that conversation to help them steer, understanding, I want this so bad, Bhavesh, and you say, I know you do, but I think this is what you need. So tell us a little bit about how those conversations go, because we're having them more and more and really just right sizing and level setting in this education phase.
Oh, so I think most people, so we essentially give them all of it and actually still make sure that it is within reason. So when we say agentic, we are actually deploying an agent as part of the probabilistic part of the process. But what we are able to show them is that we are so thoughtful and we understand your process so well that we are going to actually protect your investment as well. So, we are going to reuse some of the investment that you may have made in the robotics and RPAs and intelligent automations, and then only actually plug in and do the orchestration by combining the agents to make it an agentic orchestration, essentially. And so they like it because it's actually more cost effective for them, and they still get the best of the both world. You're on mute.
That's exactly what we need to convey. I hit the space bar here on my coffee. But that's exactly what everybody needs to understand is that if it's not just an agentic technology, it still can be an agentic process, right? And so
Yes.
so we can insert agentic frameworks into what it is that we do. And ultimately, you're going to start seeing these called patterns, really because it's the doing of something over and over again that begins to expose the pattern. So let's get into this exciting partnership. Some of the extra elements of AI. What's been very cool about AI, you said it yourself. A lot of people get bogged down in which LLM, which models am I supposed to use, like all of this, this extraneous information. And really what we need to do is start looking at some of the companies that have emerged as, Class A winners because they know the process. At the end of the day, it's still about the process. The best winners of the AI game, if they're niche, they're probably better than the ones that say they can do it all, right? And so we've started to see that as we evaluate our AI partners, we're very, very picky about who we choose to let into our ecosystem as well. So this particular use case, a couple of the elements of what Peak AI has been able to bring to the table have really, really excited us. We have a couple examples of clients that we're going to launch this into in the next couple of months, and then we have some examples there too. So what would you say are the highlights and the strengths of this particular partner that we've chosen to work with in the supply chain space? What would you say are some of the main attributes that made them so attractive as we sought them out?
Yeah, so I think it still goes back to the business element of it. So any good supply chain practitioner leader knows that, hey, it's all about service levels, it's all about the pricing, and it's all about the cash flow. So Peak understands those elements, and so everything they've designed is all about how do we make sure that we are able to serve our customers and replenish the stocks, right? How do we still actually do it in a very fast speed and at not spending too much cash? And so some of the use cases that we've actually seen, and it's built into the models that they have, are essentially how do you immediately do some cash unlocking, right? Because you are trying to do the agents that are actually figuring it out, how to balance the inventory based on the past performance, based on what the future looks like, and based on just so many different parameters. And that's why I say supply chain is just so cool because it's got so many data points and it's got so many decision points and it's got so many stakeholders. and then the timing at which those decisions need to be made. So doing all of that, and it still has some of the grunt work. Actually, unfortunately, a lot of supply chain people don't end up using the time to do the things that I mentioned. They are like figuring it out how to download the spreadsheet from the ERPs or warehouse management system or emails and things like that. So it's a very classic example why I think UiPath and Peak partner together, or is that UiPath robots can help with those elements of the process, and then Peak's models and their expertise is helping it all the data points and all the decisioning and monitoring and checking if what decisions we made, did that actually work out or not? Should we be doing any rollbacks and things like that? So that's really, I know, a long answer, but why holistically it's working well.
No, I think that's I think those are the right answers. And I think, again, back to that niche specialty and understanding the business process. And I don't know, and maybe I'm like making this up here, but maybe there is going to be a world where it doesn't matter as much what the business process like linearly used to look like, because we can just get to the outcome at warp speed. But until such time, we need to understand the happy path for our systems and our robots and our agents. So one of the questions that was poignantly asked here was about, automatic inventory replenishment. So inventory, of course, one of the three pillars that you definitely mentioned. So if there's challenges to inventory replenishment based on stock outages and potential idle stock that's on hand, how could something like this tool expose that or help us with automatic inventory replenishment?
Yeah, so in the agents, an example I'd given was like one agent can be making decision, another agent can be actually acting on it, or other agent can be actually monitoring it. So when I see this, I truly see this as a multi-agent like loop essentially that is replenishing, because like a demand agent can be doing a forecast, a supply agent can be actually planning based on the minimum order quantity and other lead time constraint. An inventory agent could be actually rebalancing what is an idle stock. And then a policy agent can be like, ensuring a guardrail that, hey, are you making sure that you are only ordering it from the right suppliers and that it has the lead time that is going to match something. So that is really how I see it working. And so that loop, and then at the end, you can still actually make sure that you are letting some autonomous decision making happening where you are changing the safety stock dynamically. You are actually, making sure that the probabilistic lead times are assured and still integrated into the agent's decisions that, hey, this is when I should be making what lot size orders. And then you can have this inventory agent that can be rebalancing too, that, hey, this is a stock that I had and it's idle. So rather than ordering, let me rebalance it across my network, across my warehouses and distribution centers. So there is a lot of those autonomous decisions about what to order, what to cancel, what to rebalance. And then you have the policy monitoring and learning type of agent that's just witnessing it all and learning from it.
Yes, no, absolutely. And what I was wondering too when you were saying that is it sounded very expensive, right? All of a sudden you said, oh, you can have an inventory agent and then a pricing agent and then this other agent that checks the agent, makes sure the agent works, right? So let's demystify cost modeling a little bit here, because it's like, oh my gosh, wait, am I hiring an entire workforce? Is this going to be like the multi-million-dollar ERPs of the 90s? Are we all terrified? And I think some people might be, right? So let's talk a little bit about what you mean by these agents. Even though it sounds like a multi-agent process, that you're really talking about the connectivity of different technologies to produce an outcome, right? So let's talk a little bit about the costing of some of these. So we can talk about it from our perspective, the pre-built pattern, but I think costing is a really big question for folks.
It is. So I think, and that's why we actually, help our customers, that we demystify it, as well as we actually make sure that it's reasonable, in the sense that it's rational actually, because we design it. So there is an infrastructure slash platform cost, but that's one time. After that, the way we design it is that, hey, you will only be able to just use somewhere robots, somewhere agents, somewhere the agents actually calling the different models and things like that. But because we do it that way, we do minimize the cost of subscription, because it's related to how many types and times those actions and decisions are needing to be made, rather than just, fixed costs, whether they're idle or not.
Yes. No, and I think another thing too to kind of keep in mind in this too, this is it's a much bigger decision than what it's ever been, right? And so the one thing that we advise clients, and more than ever, I think we walk away from deals, and we walk away when a client isn't ready to plan for scale from day one, because we know that they're going to be back to ask for questions, to ask for help, or end up in technical debt. And more, it's important that, when we embark on a journey of transformation, that everybody is on board. You can't have bits and pieces of the ship, left on shore while we're all aboard, right? We all have to kind of, take off together. And so it's really been important to make sure to plan for scale, as those kind of come into play. The other element, and I know we're not talking about other outside AI. I'm excited we're going to do a marketing program once. There's lots of marketing agents coming out too. But the other thing, as far as the autonomous decision, if I'm thinking about something as simple as an agent actioning an email as a response to something, let's say, and if that's the right next decision for a notification of some sort to be taking place, what is it that we do, or how is it that we monitor those type of outputs? So, and let me reframe the question a little bit. Used to be that it would be a consumption. Every time I hit, Abby, let's say, is the first IDP that came to mind, I'd pay. Every time a document was processed, I'd pay. Every time a decision was made, I'd pay, right? And these are decisions that are being made all the time. So how is it different than some of those ways that we've paid, per use in the past? There's still a little bit of per usage. Can you dissect that just a little bit? Because there's been a lot of questions about, what can your total cost of ownership be expectant of, so that you can truly do an ROI calculation. But how do we know the unknown, right? So maybe let's talk about that a
Yeah.
little.
So we don't know all the time those unknowns. You're right. So I think we've helped customers do it both ways. So we basically said, hey, we kind of have the historical understanding of how many transactions or how many, and agents in many cases actually, because they are so sensitive in many ways to the data that they are observing and information they are observing, the number of transactions slash decisions could in some ways be more as well. And so we don't necessarily say that, hey, does that actually cost you more? In some cases, it could cost you more. But because we are talking about, hey, platform, and then just having that outcome, we try to help the customers that, hey, as long as your total is like within this range, because otherwise it just makes it so difficult for customers to predict where to go and how to go. So we just try to understand the platform and then the number of transactions, so that we understand the compute essentially. But other than that, it's very transparent when we work with our customers. And this email example that you talked about, we have just actually had a go live today with one of our manufacturing customers, where we have agentified essentially their RFQ process, as well as their spare parts planning process, and the email exchanges from that.
That's amazing. Well, and it sounds like the spare parts is reallocation too coming into play.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. And I think it's truly that it's the chain, finally getting a chance to be connected, because, pricing was with one group and operations was with another and distribution was outsourced for a while, and there's just so many different, and if you're all the way to manufacturing with the raw materials, my God, it starts even sooner. So it definitely is the chain that needed the most orchestration and wrangling, I think, in the mix. So that's really exciting. We'll have to have that client tell us a little bit about how that winning story happens in a future date. So moving on to these questions, God, there's really, really good questions that came in, Bhavesh. I think everybody knew you were going to be on. but one of the other ones that was here that I think this is a really good one too is how do you choose a platform, and can you keep your existing platform? And of course, I'll say that, I'll start by saying that, we partner with many platforms as a result of these preferences that clients have, right? So preferences and or the right fit for the right job. So I think it's a good question. How do you think through
Yeah.
the type of platform you're going to choose if you're seeking out an agentic strategy?
So we are working with the typical platform providers, right? UiPath and Blue Prism, and some others. And the way, yes. So the first answer is yes. So you can actually take advantage of the investment in technology and in the cost that you would have made. What we are trying to actually help them with is how do you infuse this agentic into their existing platform and primarily focus on the overall orchestration of those final processes. So again, this is why our customers love us, because we don't ask them that, hey, now let's start with a whole brand new investment and like everything around it. So that is definitely how we think about it, and that is how we are helping our customers.
Yes, no, I think that's right. And things will come up along the way that you might need to add or pivot or bend.
Yeah.
And multiple platforms is certainly a strategy that we're seeing. There's congruent, terms for licensing, investments that were made years ago. They're either going to be, continue to be used, put into the mix, sunset. So
Yeah.
we've seen a multitude of ways that this works. It's not one size fits all, and we encourage you to get the right partner to help you navigate, some of these questions and some of these decisions. Because if you're stuck at what tool and what platform, you've already missed the question. If that's
Yes.
where you're stuck, you need to go back and reread the homework assignment, right? And so we can certainly help you with that. The other thing that I think was really interesting that kind of came up as a theme, as we're talking through, these different elements, was e-commerce. So we have a lot of retailers now that were born of e-commerce. And me naively a couple years ago, before I really got into the supply chain side of automation, understanding it, I was like, oh, well, e-commerce companies, they were born smart and quick, and throughput is easy and automated, right? Like there's no problems with, the people that came up like Zappos and Amazon. Oh, no, they have stuff to deal with too in e-commerce. So tell us a little bit about some of the added complexity, something that you think would be easier and more streamlined with e-commerce. Let's talk a little bit of e-commerce in the mix of supply chain, and how AI is helping that.
No, so e-commerce even more fantastic of agentic scenarios, because their volume and speed are in many cases at different level, and things can change. Like one TikTok can drop, and as we know, like Stanley become, I don't know if it was TikTok or something, whatever it is, but my daughter uses Stanley too, right? So if I'm actually like an agent that's just looking at historical forecast and says, hey, this is what I should do, and this is my suppliers, and my capacity agent is doing all that. And then if you have e-commerce that says, oh, something changed, right? Because you are so much at the customer's edge, and then you are so much on the other side with your supplier's edge. And so you don't have that much time to basically react. So agentic, I think, is actually even a much better solution for e-commerce, because it can be doing that demand sensing that's not only focused on the history, but it's also focused on what the future looks like based on the sensing that it is doing. And then it can actually even try to flag to humans in the loop that, hey, your supply agent is not going to be able to deliver something. Or the other way around too, that, hey, something happened that a trend fell off. And so if I was just, being a very typical bot, then I would be again looking at the history. But a sensing agent can be actually also monitoring those things. And so e-commerce is a fantastic place just because of at the bookends of where they actually work with the customers and suppliers both.
Yes, and I think it's such a right place for it too, because you can really push the envelope on speed. Like you said, the SLAs are almost, there's money behind the SLAs not being met,
Yeah.
with Amazon or things like that. And then another thing that came up, because I know distribution is not as sexy of a topic, right? But it is a very important part of the supply chain, ecosystem. As e-commerce, and focusing, we had a couple of e-commerce interesting enough that had registered. So it's probably where these lines of questioning came from. But as e-commerce is continuing to to adopt some of these technologies, there's also been a almost old school supply chain and new school supply chain. When you have companies like UPS, taking the return for on behalf of Amazon, or even, merchants like Whole Foods. I mean, that one makes a little bit more sense. They're under the same umbrella. But I can go, to a couple different stores. I think like Kmart was on the list of a city that I was in at one point. So it's like, how is it that those convergences, as the complexity changes for e-commerce to be able to sustain itself, then you start converging, with distribution. So what do you predict and what do you see changing, in distribution as these agents make things smarter, faster, better, and we begin to expose the data that's forecastable and more accurate up front? What do you think is going to start happening with those, with those relationships of the third party distributions that are their own supply chain company all on their own, and then these e-commerce that are trying to leverage some of that existing infrastructure?
No, so first of all, let me actually say that distribution is very near and dear my heart. I worked at DHL for many years, and I think a lot of what I learned about customer service and speed was actually at DHL. So is actually in many, like, they've helped these e-commerce companies to be much better at what they should be doing, because this customer service and speed was always in their nature. They were always very agile to basically make sure that service quality never missed a bit. So when now these e-commerce players are actually looking at the whole chain and distribution with it, they are just trying to be very deliberate about infusing the data from these distribution partners. So in a way, they are acting as very much like an extension of their own company. And that is how they are able to integrate them, because they are able to get the data as well as humans that are acting on their behalf. And that's why you see some of them are really like having the programs as a whole completely managed by these distribution providers. And when I was there, I managed some third-party logistics for some of our customers at DHL too. So it was there even from many years ago, but now with this information, and then being able, then agents' ability to like truly ingest it from different systems and make sense of it at much faster pace than it could have been before. That's what's actually changing the game. And I give kudos to the people who are into that space right now, because it's so much going on, and so much innovation and so much collaboration, that it's a fun place to be in.
No, it's definitely exciting, and it'll continue to be. And I like how we can actually, bring it to our own, we can understand supply chain in our own lives now,
Yeah,
and really understand, oh God, there must have been a problem with the distribution center, right? Or one of those
yeah.
handoffs didn't go well, feverishly tracking to see like, where's my package on my phone, right? And so we've definitely been part of seeing how it needs to work. And if you think about us as individuals, so many, and then think of companies at scale, there's a lot to process, and there's a lot to ingest as far as data goes. So real quick before we kind of wrap, and I have a couple more questions that came in. I wanted to also quickly talk about our follow-up next week, February 3rd. We'll be with James, and then one other surprise guest who hasn't confirmed yet, so I'm not going to say it just in case I jinx it. But we definitely have James from Hain Celestial, who's going to be joining to share some of his stories, some of the areas where he's applied this and literally changed the stock price. okay, literally change the stock price with the exposure of data through agents. So I am so excited for us to get into that. We also have the case study that we're going to share with everybody here too. But let's talk a little bit about global impact before we wrap, Bhavesh. And we are a global company. We represent several different organizations. Hain is actually going to be from the UK. The other one I'm thinking, United States, and then we have one from AP. And what all of these supply chain and innovation, continuous innovation leaders tend to be the ones, in charge of this, have in common is that they are seeking a bigger picture outcome. They're not in the weeds of looking at what is their, objective satisfy, or what is this project going to do for them. They're looking at the big picture, and that includes the global ecosystem and global economy. So give us a little bit of insight. We've seen a lot of changes in the last few years. We don't have to get political. It's not necessarily about that, but as purely supply chain as it gets, what are we starting to see from a global scale, and what are some of the things to take into consideration when approaching agentic, to solve for some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think it's actually a very fun and also at the same time very hectic and very challenging time to be in supply chain. I talk to all my ex-colleagues and friends that are managing supply chains now, and I would say that this technology is really helping them through these times, because there are actually those agents that are making these decisions that, hey, based on the change of a supply chain because of Ethiopia's ash or because of the tariff that changed. So how can an agent, so before, it will take you a long time sometimes to figure out why and what is going on. And then you will have to do analysis and then figure out what decisions to make. So these agents that are there are helping them with both A, understanding what's going on, and B, making those very rapid decisions. So I think this is the future, this hybrid of like me working with an agent to sometimes learn from the agent, and agent is flagging to me, hey, are you checking and making sure this is accounted for? And then also telling me that I'm making these decisions, and do you have any problem with it? So I think those are the just the future. I think like supply chain is right for, I would say, like more than 50% of the work that supply chain people do is completely agent infused. If not now, then for sure in next couple of years.
It's definitely agentifiable. Let's say that if we're going to make up new words here, we can definitely get that done. So I also just want to thank everybody for staying. I wanted to add here our contact information should you have any questions. Now, we are not quite at the point where agents are like Jarvis, if you're a Marvel fan, and you talk to him and he will, regulate your body temperature. I'm very hopeful we'll get there one day. But until such time, feel free to reach out to myself or Bhavesh with questions. If you have industry-specific items, our network is big, vast, heavy, lots of folks that we can introduce you to. So it's not just us. Leverage the network, continue to come back each month. And next week, we have a special little, snack in between the two next webinars, a little question and answer session with folks who have actually implemented this. So reach out to Bhavesh or myself with any questions. Thanks so much for the attendance and time and attention, and we will be sending out the PowerPoints, recording, and all the stuff you come to expect in short order. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.